Welcome to an Out of the Park 24 tutorial. This is a video I record each year when a new version of OOTP comes out, and while I call it a beginner's guide, I also try to include info that may be interesting to non-beginners as well. Some of this video will be, it'll cover things that I've gone over in previous years' beginner's guide, but I also try to throw in new tips and info each year as well. The tips and strategies I cover in the video, they're meant to be pretty high level, so there's definitely some detail and nuance that I leave out. But these tips are hopefully a good start on understanding the most important aspects of playing Out of the Park, particularly as general manager. So this is at the manager's office screen that comes up when you start a new standard MLB game. However, many of the tips that I'll apply, I think will generally also apply to historical sims and fictional leagues as well. The first thing we're going to look at is our personnel page. The staff you have throughout the organization it's really important to your team's success, but let's start looking at the trainer. So for trainers, I don't want weaknesses in any areas like this poor and fair and decent and average. Like if I was the trainer if I was in charge of the Angels, I would get rid of this guy ASAP because I don't want weaknesses in any areas. I generally want every area to be at least good, which this guy only has 2 areas that are at least good, with this good in rehab other injuries and this legendary in preventing back injuries. The 2 I really focus on in particular, once I have a guy who meets that kind of baseline level that I want, are preventing arm injuries, because this can help your pitching staff stay healthy. And something I started paying more attention to in Out of the Park 23 is preventing back injuries, because I've found, and this is just kind of anecdotal, but back injuries really seem to zap hitters' performance. Hello, real-life Christian Yelich. From there, we'll look at scouts. So I prefer scouts who favor tools over favorability. Here on this scouting preference, you'll have, I think it's neutral is the middle one, I believe. But then you'll have favors ability, highly favors ability, or favors tools and highly favors tools. The most succinct way I think I can summarize the difference is favoring tools versus favoring tools versus favoring ability is that favoring tools will get you more players with a high ceiling, whereas favoring ability will get you more players with a higher floor. I want my scout to be at least good in all 4 of these categories, which this dude is, but I prioritize guys who are among the best in scouting amateurs and scouting internationals. So this guy looks great, but with this only good in international scouting, I would see if there was a guy who met my baseline of being at least good in everything, but then being better in international. Because these are the types of players, both amateur and international, that you need to develop a strong farm system. And 2, you can also use stats to inform some of your evaluation of major and minor league players, whereas I'm not as comfortable doing that with the other types of players, even if there are even stats available for them. Moving right along, let's look at hitting coaches. So I want them to be excellent or better at teaching hitting. So obviously I'm getting rid of Marcus Thames here. I want them to have average or better relationships with most or all of my hitters, which you can look at here, which this guy has good, but it's with pitchers. And I especially Rendon and Trout, my two of my star players. I would not be a fan of this relationship menu here from Mr. Marcus. So I also want a solid rating in development and aging, which again, really, really weak performance here. I would get rid of Marcus Thames immediately. Pitching coaches, we're basically doing the same thing as hitting coaches, but instead of looking at teaching hitting, we're looking at teaching pitching, obviously. Honestly, I don't really look at mechanics much. Maybe I'm missing something there, but I've never really paid too much attention to it, and I haven't found a reason to do so. But I'm all ears if you've got reasons to do so. Now here, this dude has good relationships, and several of those are with pitchers, but he's also got a lot of pitchers he's got fair or poor relationships, including Ohtani. So I would not be a fan of these relationships. Now there's also other reasons I'm not bringing him in, because he's just not a good pitching coach. But say he was an ideal pitching coach with the other things, I still don't love these relationships, especially the Ohtani thing. I prioritize my star players' relationships with the coaches. For manager, you can see that I'm listed as the manager here. I generally just do GM only in my actual sim. So we'll look at the bench coach as an example and just pretend he's my manager. But I want a guy who has average or better relationships with most of my roster, but especially my star players. So I think based off of the Ohtani and Trout relationships, Ray Montgomery would never be my manager. There's a chance star players won't re-sign with you if they don't get along with your manager. This is much more likely to happen with free agents won't come to you if they don't like your manager, but it can happen with players you already have too. I also want solid ratings in development and aging. These two, handles development and handles aging. And bench coach really is pretty similar to manager. I don't handle it really all that differently. I do look at manager style some, and I look at sample lineup some if I'm not going to be controlling the lineup, but less so than those other things that I already mentioned. Next, we're going to look at manager options. This is going to be where you decide how much of your team you want to control. I control most of these categories. I haven't set this up for like a sim, how I actually do it exactly, but it's close. I control most of these categories in the first half because it's the most important things you do as a GM. Trading, drafting, controlling the active roster, signing and releasing players, etc. I do let my manager, let me see, where is it? Assign the instructor roles. I've found that the AI seems to be fine at this, so I just don't spend time with here. A big one you'll want to look at to decide is minor league promotions and demotions. So, which you can see right here. So this is where you manage every player in your minor league system, right? The question is, do you want to be in charge of promoting and demoting every player, or is this something you're going to delegate to your assistant GM? I will say this is something I always used to manage myself, but it's really one of the more time-consuming aspects of the game. So I've gotten away from that, and I let my assistant GM control this at this level. But I still manage my top prospects in my system, like their promotions and demotions, because I don't think the AI is all that great at promoting and demoting minor league players at the right time and to the right level. So I still control, I would say, the top 30 or so prospects in my system is on par. It's not always the top 30 exactly, but I'd say 30 prospects. Normally my top prospects, and then some guys I have a particular interest in for one reason or another. Now, how do you do that? How do you control the dudes, right? Like override this for certain players, right? So let's go to our player development page, and let's say that we wanted to control for Coleman Crow. You go to his player profile, you go to shortlist, and you can either go add to default shortlist or create new shortlist. So that's where you'll track him, right? That way you'll know the players that you're tracking, and I'll show you where that shortlist is in a second. So add to default. And then you're going to go to set game strategy, and you go to lock to team, lock current strategy. So he's now locked at AA, and he will only go up and down as I move him up and down. Now, when you're managing 30 guys like this, or however many guys, how do you keep track of all of them? The easiest way is to go to add them to the shortlist like I showed you, which you can then access by going player search and shortlist. Here's my default shortlist. It's under batters, so that dude isn't there, but there he is now. Boom. All right, let's talk about budgets really quickly. We're going to go just the player development aspect of the budget, these budget settings. So once the season starts, you won't be able to edit any of these budgets listed here, so set them before opening day. My recommendation for player development budget is, really as high as possible with a minimum of 20 million. On smaller market teams, there have been times I go below 20, but I really try to use that as a floor, and I think 20 to 24 million is a reasonable range for this. Now, for draft and international free agents, I set it to 0. I still intend to use money on the draft and international free agents, obviously, but setting it to 0 will free the money up here in the total money available and the money for extensions. Say, for example, you have this $8.26 million allotted for the draft and you don't spend it all. You won't get that money available until after the draft. This way, by zeroing this out, you'll have that money free the whole time. Now, you'll want to be really careful to leave the money in your available money, like set some aside. Know that in that available money on this page, some of it is for your draft and international free agents, right? If not, you'll be out of money for it. But this way, you'll have that money free the whole time. It'll be free in future years for extensions, which is really big too. All right, so next we'll look at scouting. This is another budget that we'll lock when the season begins. This is probably an area I'd imagine where I might spend less than many people would recommend. I'm honestly not even really sure, but I'm comfortable setting my scouting floor somewhere around 12 million. And I generally don't go over 16 million with it. On smaller market teams, I've even gone below 12 million when I've had a budget crunch. Like if I've got a year where I'm really pushing the chips in and really trying to maximize the major league roster and sign some guys, I'll go below 12. I started in last year's version and didn't notice any drawbacks to divvying up the percentages as 10% to major, 10% to minor league, 40 to amateur, 40 to international. Again, like I said earlier, you can count on stats a little bit more to scout major and minor league players, but you need to hit on draft picks and IFAs to have a healthy farm system. So those are the two I'm most concerned about my scout helping me with. All right, next we're going to look at something I get asked about a good bit. And honestly, it's not brand new to Out of the Park. It's been in the game for a few years now, but I think it's one of the best new features of the last several years. And to some people, it's a very minor thing. To me, it's a pretty major thing. And that is the ability to edit the stat rows you see here on player profile pages. As you see here, the stats I have displayed are not the default. So how do you create a player stat row, and how do you make it the default row? So for a hitter, you go to batting stats. For a pitcher, you do the same thing, but pitching stats. And you go to view, you go to edit, and say you want to make a new row, add stat row. You go to new row, and you go to edit stat row. And say you just want a stat row that tells you games started, and stolen base percentage. And you want that to display on the player profile page by default. You move it all the way up to the top one. You hit OK. Boom. It's now there. Now, of course, that would be an interesting way to try to manage a team, just going by game started, and stolen bases. I'm not going to do it. So I'll go ahead and delete this row. But this one is at the top, so now that'll be my default one. Really, again, I think one of the better updates to the game of the last several versions. So there you have it. That's the Out of the Park 24 Beginner's Guide. Hope it was helpful. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope my the cold and respiratory thing that I'm fighting wasn't too obvious in my breathing through the mic. But thanks for watching. Talk to you guys next time.